Okay, now we're ready to install the rest of the keycaps. Please do not plug in the keyboard to your computer until you're instructed to later on. The steps in this section will describe everything you need to know about how to install the keys, how to evaluate the sound of the spring as you test each key to make sure the key actuates properly when it is pressed, how to reduce the buzzing sound of a key, and/or fix a key whose spring does not click or buckle as it is pressed down. It is completely normal for many keys not to function on your first try. Removing and reinstalling a non-working key a few dozen times is not the way to go about setting up your new Model F. Keep watching to avoid frustration and reduce your setup time. Proper key installation involves holding the keyboard vertically, spacebar side up. Don't let the keyboard rest horizontally until each key has fully been pressed in. Do not connect the keyboard to a computer until you have installed the keys. It is important to test the Model F before you start using it on your computer. Model F springs are often dislodged during shipping, which can result in a bad click sound or no click at all, and keys may need to be reseated. Now, we test each key to make sure it buckles properly. Follow this next part to see step by step how to fix a non-working key, as well as help you determine what key press sounds good versus what is a potential issue. The fix for each key takes less than 1 minute. You should not spend more time than that for each key. The last step is to replace the spring or switch it with another key's spring. Often springs may be damaged during installation, and once damaged, a spring may no longer be usable. The first keys you should install are the ones 2U and larger. Due to the design of buckling spring keycaps, these keys are most likely to become stuck when pressed all the way down and require following these steps to fix such instances of key binding. Here is the first method. You may have to do steps several times in some instances of binding. Follow these steps, install the key, and test with about 10 to 20 key presses. Remove and do all the steps again if needed. First, gently pinch the affected key's outer stem or ear and stabilizer insert pole between your thumb and forefinger and wiggle side to side about 20 to 30 times. Your fingers should be positioned so as to squeeze deeply into the key, as deep as possible, not just at the very end of the key stem. After squeezing, gently wiggle the key post, the part that goes into the stabilizer insert, 10 times in the direction of the left and right sides of the key. Seems to mitigate binding when the extreme edges of a key are pressed. Be very gentle, as this is the easiest part to break on a key. Do not touch the stabilizer insert itself or add any lubrication to it. If it is still stuck, but maybe a little better, repeat the prior steps and test again. Sometimes the two wings or ears of the stem get stuck too close together, so you have to gently spread them apart. Some folks have reported that the horizontal or white stabilizer insert works better with the vertical keys instead of the vertical or black insert. If the key is too loose and pops off, you just need to gently widen the stem a bit without breaking it. The stem consists of the two legs that go into the barrel. It's common for the larger key stems to be slightly too narrow or too wide. Please use the other key's stems for reference on the proper width. Other potential fixes are described in the manual. Sometimes unplugging the keyboard and plugging it back in after 15 minutes fixes a random issue you may be having. If the key doesn't press because the spring can't move, the flipper may be stuck. Remove the key. Do the flipper and spring move freely in the barrel if you flick it? Sometimes in shipping, the keyboard is jolted so much that the flipper gets stuck and can't move, and I have to carefully use tweezers to push the flipper back up into position to match the other flippers. Sometimes moving the flipper carefully with tweezers does the trick. Otherwise, you have to open up the keyboard to reposition the flipper. If you did not check that each flipper could move freely in the earlier steps, at this time you may have to take off all the keycaps to open up the inner assembly and get the flipper back into position. I recommend tightening the two controller screws that ground the controller, as they may have loosened as the keyboards are bounced around in shipping. If you see issues with holding down a modifier key and another key at the same time, or issues with key presses being out of sequence from what you typed when typing fast, fixing the grounding screws will likely solve this issue. And also adjusting the springs and replacing them may also fix the issue. Do not use the key press monitor part of the P. Andrew utility, as it currently does not function correctly. if the spacebar is making contact with the keys above it. It is a matter of adjusting the shape of the spacebar stabilizer wire, and maybe putting some scrap foam or other material between the spacebar stabilizer wire and the back of the metal tab so that the stabilizer is moved upwards a bit. The spacebar needs to be moved farther away from the key it is making contact with, and that can be done by bending the spacebar and or putting some material in the spacebar tab. Do not sand away parts of the keycap or do anything else on your own, as it is unnecessary. Quote, putting a rectangular piece of cardstock vertically between the inner face of the tab and the wire did the trick, end quote, for one Desk Authority member. There is definitely a break-in period with Model F keyboards, especially with the springs. There's a good chance that the springs will sound even better over time with usage. Also, pressing a key a number of times may fix an initially flaky key after adjusting the spring. Next up, we want to remove and reseat any loose or non-working keys. Regarding reseating springs, in nearly all cases, you do not need to take apart the keyboard to fix keys that do not click, nor do you need to spend a few minutes pressing a troublesome key. Reattach the key with the keyboard positioned as shown vertically with the spacebar row up. Often, reseating a key is not enough to make the key work or to reduce or eliminate a buzzing sound when the key is pressed, and you need to remove and reattach the spring. The tools you'll need include a wire key puller and tweezers. To remove your spacebar, the metal spacebar tabs may be pressed down, so be careful when pulling off the spacebar and its stabilizer wire. Then you want to pull off the wire as shown. If you pull down or push, it may break the spacebar's plastic tabs. Make sure the stabilizer wire is at a 90-degree bend on both sides to start out with. Slide one end in and carefully press the other side in so as not to break the plastic tab. The wire should rotate freely. Test each key one at a time. Press each key a few times. Remove keys that buzz or do not click properly. It is up to you to decide which keys sound good or bad. I recommend ordering extra springs and the first aid kit if you are as sensitive as I am to the sound of your keyboard. Make sure the stabilizer inserts are pressed down all the way so that they're flat with the top of the barrel. This key is not installed properly. It does not click and will not send a signal to the computer when it is pressed. In most cases, just remove the key, orient the keyboard vertically, spacebar end up, and reinstall the key. Sometimes you just need to adjust the spring. First up, you want to try once or twice to remove and reseat the key. If this still produces buzzing or a non-working key, you'll have to go on to the next step, which is adjusting the spring. Hold the keyboard upright and gently tap so springs fall into place. Here are some steps if you're hearing buzz when you press a key. First, we stretch the spring and use tweezers to press the spring downwards. Use angled tweezers as shown to compress the spring perpendicular to the flipper. This will push the spring onto the nub of the flipper. Squeeze the tweezers and compress the spring several times. The goal is to get that spring pushed down far onto the nub of the flipper. That happened to fix the most salient issues of this example. The goal when reinstalling the spring is 1. To have the spring touch the 12 o'clock position of the barrel when the keyboard is positioned that way, and 2. To have the end of the spring in the 12 o'clock position relative to the flipper. If the spring end is not positioned at 12 o'clock and the spring does not touch the barrel, buckling error is more likely to occur. Grip the base of the spring towards the flipper when gliding the spring. In this example, tweezers grip the spring a bit too high, which is not going to work. Second, if a key still buzzes, carefully removing and flipping the spring upside down can fix most spring issues. Twist off the spring counterclockwise, flip it upside down, and reinstall while keeping the top spring end at 12 o'clock always. When removing a spring, twist it counterclockwise. Never pull a string straight up. And third, if that doesn't work, replace the spring. Replacing the spring with another spring is a last but often necessary step. This is a very important step because not all springs will work and some may have been damaged. But interestingly, that spring might work in another key, so there is no need to discard the spring. You may want to switch two keys' springs around with each other, and the swap may make both keys work. To reinstall a spring, use tweezers, or a chopstick or small screwdriver with the end partially broken off. Before installing, make sure the end of the spring is in the 12 o'clock position. Make sure the spring is close to or touches the top of the barrel, otherwise the key may not work reliably. Sometimes, if a spring is too far away from that top of the barrel when the keyboard is held vertically, spacebar end up, it may prevent you from installing a working key. So you can see that you can replace these springs without having to take apart the whole keyboard in most cases. And here is a typing test after adjusting all the springs. Now that all the keys are adjusted and you tested each key several times before this step, we are going to connect the keyboard to the computer for the first time. Do one more check before plugging in your keyboard. Be sure you can hear the snap of the flipper when pressing each and every key. I like to press each key a few times to be sure of a reliable actuation. If you are just feeling the pressure of a spring when a key is pressed, but without a snap, that means you have not installed the key properly, and many keys on the keyboard will not work due to the way a pressed key confuses the auto-calibration when a keyboard is plugged in. Open a keyboard tester website. Be sure to plug the keyboard directly into the computer, not into a USB hub, and make sure there are no other connected USB devices besides the mouse, just for troubleshooting to check for conflicts. USB hubs can often cause problems with Model F keyboards. If the keyboard is not detected, check that the USB cable is plugged in fully on the controller end of the USB cable as well. If you see @Mega32 in your device manager for Windows, System Information for Mac, or Hard Info on Linux, you may have accidentally cleared the firmware and need to reflash the firmware. See the Advanced Topics section to fix this. Also, try on another port and on another computer. Test each key with the Keyboard Tester website. Refer to the product page for the factory default layout. For example, the right control key may be factory programmed as the function key, so when you press this key, it will not register as a control key, and it will appear that the key is broken. One less common issue you may find is inconsistent key registration. Double presses, key ghosting, keys not recognized, or key spamming, which is extra keys when one key is pressed. Double presses and other issues could be related to the two controller ground screws not being tight enough, or due to the seating of the spring on the flipper nub, or some kind of damage to the spring. The tops of the springs can get caught on something and bend out of shape. Spring damage can't be 100% fixed in my experience without replacing the spring itself. Or it could be an issue with the debounce filter and threshold, but these two are related to the older Xwhatsit firmware, which stopped being used as the factory default in early 2020. Key registration issues are usually an issue with the way that the keys were installed. For example, if the keyboard wasn't held upright and each key tested for the proper click beforehand, that may be the cause. For example, you may see double presses if the spring is not properly reinstalled, especially if it is not pushed down all the way onto the flipper nub, or if the spring is not reinstalled with its end between 12 and 1 o'clock. Don't forget that one of the steps to fixing keys involves replacing the spring itself, as shown earlier. When testing, always make sure the Xwhatsit controller is attached to the bottom inner assembly plate with both ground screws. If, after you have followed these instructions completely and many keys in a row or column do not work, please follow the section on additional diagnostics through the P-Andrew utility, coming up later. If one or a few scattered keys do not work, it is most certainly not a hardware error, but instead a user installation error or debris that entered the keyboard and moved between the flipper and capacitive PCB, thereby interfering with the key press signal. Does the rightmost row of keys get stuck when you press one of them? Sometimes all of the keys on the leftmost or rightmost side may be stuck because they are too close to the case. Things may have shifted in shipping. All you need to do is loosen the 4 screws on the bottom and slide the mechanism away from the edge it is too close to, and of course tighten it back up again when done. Check to make sure the inner plates slide in fully so the sides of the tabs touch the sides of the bottom inner assembly, as shown. If there is some space between the tabs, then there could be some issues with keyboard functionality. Also, the top left tab should be folded down a little to lock everything in place.